The story I'm going to tell you today takes place in New York City. This is one of the largest cities in the United States, covering an area of 783.8 square miles. New York City consists of 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. In Queens, there's a new urban area called Flushing. Flushing is known for being one of the largest and most diverse neighborhoods in New York City. In Flushing, there is an apartment complex called Skyview Park. This is a 40-story building constructed in 2010 and is considered one of the earliest high-rise buildings in the area. On the 30th floor of the complex, there is a secret room. The room is known to be haunted by eerie legends, and no one has been able to live there. An old lady once moved in to live there. She had heard the rumors, but believed that if she didn't do anything wrong, she wouldn't be afraid of ghosts knocking on her door. After moving in, she often heard moaning sounds or faint crying in the hallway at night. Furniture in the house also mysteriously moved without explanation. After living there for less than a month, she quickly moved out of the building. Next, 3 large men moved into the apartment. Like the old lady, the 3 men did not believe in superstitious nonsense. However, after moving in, they all experienced indescribable fears at night. They also moved out after less than a month. Many people continued to move in to live there. No one stayed long. The apartment was abandoned for a few years. Because no one dared to live there, heavy iron doors sealed off the apartment. Not only did it make curious onlookers shudder when they looked, even the neighbors living on the same floor felt haunted. Every night, they often heard footsteps that sounded like high heels clicking down the hallway. The door of that apartment also often opened on its own for unknown reasons, accompanied by the voices of 2 girls coming from inside, sometimes arguing, sometimes crying. Residents also frequently saw dark shadows moving around the apartment or in the hallway. After supernatural events continued to occur here, residents on the 30th floor gradually moved out of the building. While New York City has limited space and high housing demand, the appearance of a haunted apartment had a negative impact on the area. The apartment was later called the No.1 haunted house in New York City. The incident above also had a significant impact on the rental housing industry in the area. To prevent the situation from getting worse, local authorities proceeded to seal off the apartment, bricks and cement. They explained that they sealed off the apartment because they wanted to connect it with the floor below. However, that explanation was not accepted by the residents because everyone living there knew that a tragedy had occurred in that apartment. On August 8, 1984, which was a Tuesday, temperature in New York City began to rise. At 8:30 p.m., a man suddenly broke into apartment 316 on the 30th floor of Skyview Park. Inside apartment 316 was a family of 3, including the mother, Sarah Williams, 53 years old. She worked as a janitor for a school. Her 2 daughters were Emily Williams, 22 years old, who had graduated from Queens College and was working as a secretary in a government agency, and Sophie Williams, 18 years old, who was a high school student. The 2 sisters were 4 years apart. Their father had unfortunately passed away from an illness a year ago. After he died, the 3 of them lived relying on each other, and the older daughter, Emily, had taken on an important role in supporting the family. Mr. Thompson, who lived in apartment 313 on the same floor, witnessed the man barging into the Williams home. He said that on that night, the man had caught and held the mother in the hallway and forced the 2 daughters to open the door. The older daughter, wanting to save her mother, immediately opened the door. The man then quickly approached and attacked the younger daughter with a knife, then the mother and the older daughter. The 2 daughters fell to the ground before they could react. The man then quickly fled the scene. Everything happened so suddenly that Mr. Thompson didn't have time to react. He then quickly called the police. After receiving the report, police quickly arrived at the scene on the 30th floor. Medical staff also arrived shortly after. Upon arrival, they took all 3 people to Mount Sinai Queens Hospital, about 1 kilometer away, for medical treatment. Upon examination, all 3 had multiple stab wounds and severed arteries, in very critical condition. The 2 daughters were pronounced dead after arriving at the hospital. The mother was rescued in time and survived the crisis after emergency treatment. After the incident occurred, the story quickly spread throughout the local area. In addition to Mr. Way Thompson, who called the police, many other residents in the same building had witnessed the entire incident. Based on the leads provided by residents, police learned that the perpetrator was slightly overweight and could be the boyfriend, the older Williams' daughter. This was because 4 days earlier, Emily Williams, the older daughter, reported to the police that she had been assaulted by a man. At that time, the mother feared that if the incident spread, it would have serious consequences and her daughter would be stigmatized, so she decided not to pursue the case. That man was someone Emily Williams knew. To know more about the man above, let's go back in time to a few years before the incident occurred. At that time, Emily Williams was a student at Queens College. She met a male classmate named Michael Johnson. He was the second child in the family and had an older sister. Michael lived in the Forest Hills neighborhood of Queens, about 7 miles from Emily's home. Whenever there was a break, Michael would take her out. Gradually, the two developed into a couple. After graduation, Emily worked as a secretary for a government office, while Michael joined the New York Police Department and became a member of the mobile unit. Due to their work, the time they spent together also gradually decreased. But they still called each other daily, and their relationship was very good. Michael was very obedient to his girlfriend. If she didn't like him smoking, he would quit smoking. If she didn't like him drinking, he would quit drinking. If she didn't like him gambling, he would quit gambling. However, what was missing was that their relationship was still not approved by both sets of parents. Michael's parents really liked Emily and wanted their son to marry her as soon as possible. However, on the contrary, Emily's parents did not like Michael. They thought he had violent tendencies and poor morals. They always opposed their daughter meeting him. Later, due to disciplinary issues, Michael was fired from the police force. Next, he worked temporary jobs at a hotel. Because he had a lot of free time, he would pick up and drop off Emily at work every day. However, Michael's impression in the Williams family's minds still did not change. When they learned that Michael had been fired from the police department for disciplinary violations, they felt even more that their daughter's future partner was untrustworthy. When Michael visited the family, they always greeted him coldly. Once, suspecting Emily of having a relationship with another man, Michael attacked that person, causing serious injuries. At first, Emily thought her boyfriend did so because he cared too much about her, but she did not realize the seriousness of the issue. As time passed, Michael's jealousy and suspicion increased. He began to control her, not allowing her to meet any other men. With her boyfriend's extreme behavior and her parents' constant opposition, Emily gradually realized that Michael was not someone worthy of marriage and began to contact him less. In October 1983, Emily's father had to be hospitalized due to illness and passed away 5 days later. The family's only pillar had left them. The whole family was very sad because of this. During this time, Michael voluntarily stood out and called on a group of friends to help his girlfriend's family organize the funeral for her deceased father. After that help, the mother's attitude towards Michael changed. She began to accept her daughter's relationship with him. The couple's relationship also gradually improved. Michael continued to pick up and drop off Emily at work every day. Because his actions had been acknowledged by the mother, she agreed to let Michael move in to live with them. The neighbors gradually became familiar with Michael and knew he was a kind person. The neighbors affectionately called him a chubby boy. But surprisingly, this decision of hers led to a horrific consequence. Emily had a younger sister, Sophie Williams, 4 years younger than her and a high school student. After Michael moved in, the younger sister always disliked her sister's boyfriend. She felt that since he moved in, the house had become noisy and seriously affected her studies. 2 months later, in December 1983, only Sophie and Michael were left at home. While Sophie was preparing to study, Michael was loudly talking on the phone with friends. The laughter echoing through the door crack was unbearable, so the younger sister walked into Michael's room and asked him to speak more quietly. However, Michael ignored her. and felt angry at the younger sister. Unexpectedly, he then directly attacked the younger sister's face, causing her face to be bruised and even breaking her teeth. When the mother and older sister returned home and saw this scene, they quickly called the police. From then on, he was kicked out of the house. However, Michael and Emily's relationship continued. A few days after the incident, Emily reconciled with Michael. She even attended Michael's sister's wedding with her mother and younger sister. Michael was then allowed to return home and come and go freely. However, on August 4, 1984, an incident occurred that made the Williams family see Michael's true face. That afternoon, the mother received a phone call from Michael saying that her older daughter Emily had just been in an accident and was being treated in the emergency room at the hospital. The mother was extremely worried and quickly went to the hospital with her younger daughter, but after arriving, they discovered that no patient named Emily Williams had been admitted to the hospital that day. It was all a deceptive plan by Michael. After realizing they had been tricked, the two quickly returned home. When they opened the door, they encountered a horrible scene. They saw the older daughter Emily lying on the sofa with her upper body naked, her mouth stuffed with a piece of cloth, and her hands tied behind her back. Michael was sitting right on top of her. After seeing this, the mother was very angry and immediately called the police. She scolded loudly and demanded Michael leave the house immediately. After seeing this, he knelt down and begged for forgiveness. He said he deliberately lied to the mother and younger sister because he was arguing with Emily. He wanted to be alone with his girlfriend to resolve the issue, but after they couldn't reach an agreement, he lost control and acted that way. After the police arrived, the mother's attitude changed 180 degrees. She was worried that her daughter's reputation would be negatively affected if the incident spread, so she said it was just a misunderstanding and would not pursue it further. Police then left. After the above incident, the relationship between Michael and the Williams family was broken. The mother even had harsh words, saying she would never let her daughter see him again. Emily also decided to break up with her boyfriend, but Michael did not give up. On August 8, 1984, Michael was at his home in Forest Hills, Queens. He suddenly changed his expression, took out a 20 centimeters long knife from the kitchen, and was about to go out. His parents saw this and tried to stop him but failed. At 5:30 p.m., on the 30th floor of Skyview Park, a neighbor suddenly discovered Michael kneeling outside the door of apartment 3116. His face was tear-stained, and he was whispering Emily's name. After an emotional moment, he continuously knelt and begged for forgiveness. After hearing the commotion, neighbors gathered around to see what was happening. That afternoon, only the mother and younger daughter were at home in apartment 3116. They ignored his pleas and even wanted to chase him away. But when they thought Emily was about to get off work and come home, prevent Emily from meeting him, they stood waiting at the window looking down. When they saw Emily on the lower floor about to enter the building, they shouted for her to go away and not come home. Emily saw the worried expressions of her mother and younger sister and guessed that Michael must have come to the house to harass her again. She immediately turned around and went to the nearby police station to call the police. At 6:30 p.m., under the escort of 2 police officers, Emily returned home. That time, Michael was still kneeling outside apartment 316. He was heartbroken and said something to the 2 police officers. He hoped to be forgiven by Emily and her family. After entering the house, Emily said loudly, "I will never forgive you, and if you don't leave, I will expose your shameful behavior to the police." All of this was witnessed by the neighbors. Then the 2 police officers determined that the incident was a dispute between a couple. They advised Michael to leave quickly. Because the police were present, he did not dare to act recklessly. He then left with the police. The 3 Williams family members in the house saw that the matter had been resolved, so they breathed a sigh of relief. But no one could have imagined that half an hour later, when the mother opened the door, she was shocked to discover that Michael, who had just left, had returned. He was still kneeling in the initial position. After seeing her open the door, Michael immediately stepped forward and hugged the mother's legs, crying and begging her for forgiveness. Seeing the situation like that, she quickly retreated into the house and closed the door. She then called Michael's parents and asked them to quickly come pick up their son. At 7:40 p.m., Michael's parents arrived in front of apartment 316. They were angry when they saw their son kneeling and crying like that in front of the door and continuously persuaded him. But he ignored them and even shouted loudly, "I can go home, but if I go home, I'll die for you to see." At that time, Emily stood near the door and replied, "Even if you die, I won't shed a tear." She immediately turned around and went to the nearby police station to call the police. At 6:30 p.m., under the escort of 2 police officers, Emily returned home. That time, Michael was still kneeling outside apartment 316. He was heartbroken and said something to the 2 police officers. He hoped to be forgiven by Emily and her family. After entering the house, Emily said loudly, "I will never forgive you, and if you don't leave, I will expose your shameful behavior to the police." All of this was witnessed by the neighbors. Then the 2 police officers determined that the incident was a dispute between a couple. They advised Michael to leave quickly. Because the police were present, he did not dare to act recklessly. He then left with the police. The 3 Williams family members in the house saw that the matter had been resolved, so they breathed a sigh of relief. But no one could have imagined that half an hour later, when the mother opened the door, she was shocked to discover that Michael, who had just left, had returned. He was still kneeling in the initial position. After seeing her open the door, Michael immediately stepped forward and hugged the mother's legs, crying and begging her for forgiveness. Seeing the situation like that, she quickly retreated into the house and closed the door. She then called Michael's parents and asked them to quickly come pick up their son. At 7:40 p.m., Michael's parents arrived in front of apartment 316. They were angry when they saw their son kneeling and crying like that in front of the door and continuously persuaded him. But he ignored them and even shouted loudly, "I can go home, but if I go home, I'll die for you to see." At that time, Emily stood near the door and replied, "Even if you die, I won't shed a tear." After hearing this, Michael was stunned for a moment. A few seconds later, his eyes became fierce. Calmly told his parents that he needed to use the bathroom, then turned and walked towards the stairs. Mrs. Sarah Williams felt the situation was better. Seeing that there were still many neighbors standing outside, Michael's parents were still there. Not wanting to make things worse, she opened the door and pulled Michael's parents to the stairs to talk. She was very sad and hoped they could take their son to see a psychologist. What Mrs. Sarah Williams did not expect was that all those words were overheard by Michael, who had returned from the bathroom. He stared blankly at the 3 people and drew the 20 centimeters long knife, quickly stepping forward and taking Mrs. Williams hostage. He hugged her and moved bit by bit to the door of apartment 316 on the 30th floor, shouting loudly that if the 2 sisters inside did not open the door, he would immediately kill their mother. Some neighbors, after seeing this, quickly ran back to their homes. Seeing him agitated, Mrs. Williams told her daughters not to open the door, but Emily really wanted to save her mother, so she quickly opened the door. Michael then pushed Mrs. Williams aside and swung the knife towards Emily. The younger sister, Sophie, who was next to her at that time, quickly stepped forward to stop him. Michael at that time was like a demon. Quickly used the knife to attack the younger sister's face, slashing across her face. The older sister, Emily, then stepped forward to stop him, but was also attacked by him. Mrs. Williams was then attacked by him but quickly ran into the kitchen. Michael's parents witnessed the entire incident on the spot. They were so scared that they were frozen, stunned, and dazed. They did not call the police or offer to help. Then both of them panicked and left the scene, returning to their own home. After committing the crime, Michael quickly walked out of the apartment complex, walking slowly on the street. After receiving calls from many different people, police and medical staff quickly arrived at the scene. At the scene, they found the 2 Williams sisters had been stabbed multiple times. Their necks almost severed, while the mother had also been stabbed multiple. On the way to the hospital, the two daughters died. The mother was in critical condition. After being taken to the hospital, she survived after a month of emergency treatment. At 2 a.m. the next day, August 9, 1984, police raided the house and arrested Michael on suspicion of murder. Throughout the arrest, he did not resist. Mr. Thompson, who lived in apartment 30113 opposite 3D16, witnessed the entire incident and was also the first person to call the police. He testified that the perpetrator's parents did not take any action to prevent the tragedy when it occurred. The two of them stood outside observing. They later borrowed the phone from Mr. Thompson's house. They did not call the police. Instead, they dialed 3 consecutive numbers and told the person on the phone that 2 people had died, and then they left. 5 months after the incident occurred, on October 20th, 1984, the case was tried at the New York Supreme Court. Michael was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of aggravated assault. In court, he only pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and refused to plead guilty to murder. He testified that he had been provoked by the victim Emily and lost control of his emotions before committing the murder. This was a random crime, not an intentional act. After 5 days of trial, on October 26, 1984, the jury unanimously agreed that the defendant Michael was guilty of 2 counts of murder and sentenced him to death. After the trial, Michael was dissatisfied with the verdict and appealed. In 1985, half a year after the first trial, a second trial was held at the New York Court of Appeals. A panel of 5 judges was approved to retry the case. The defendant Michael denied the murder charges in court. The defense lawyer focused on the provocation argument, pointing out that the victim Emily had told the defendant Michael, "Even if you die, I won't shed a tear." This was claimed to be the reason that caused him to be emotionally provoked, lose his mind, and commit murder. The defense argued that the judge had not reminded the jury about this in the first trial. The judge in the second trial pointed out that the first trial judge had the right to decide whether the defendant was provoked when committing the crime, and it was not necessarily something to be discussed by the jury. Moreover, for the defendant's actions to be considered spontaneous, there must be a sudden and temporary loss of self-control. The defendant was angry at the victim's comment. He should have acted immediately, not half an hour later after going to the bathroom and then returning with a knife. Furthermore, he took the mother hostage. The case above was not due to impulse, but was a premeditated action. On July 12, 1985, the case was retried at the New York Court of Appeals. The appeal was rejected, and the original verdict was upheld. After the incident, Mrs. Williams was fortunately still alive and had moved out of apartment 3Z16. Then there were continuous haunting rumors occurring in that room. Some residents on the same floor also moved out due to fear. To prevent panic among the residents, the housing authority renovated apartment 3016 and the adjacent room into an electrical room. They also sealed the door on the 30th floor into a wall. Many people rumored that behind that wall, there were occasionally sounds of TV or water dripping, and at night, some even heard the sound of 2 girls talking behind the wall. Many rumors were passed on by the residents. It took about 10 years after the incident for it to gradually be forgotten. Many people believed that the 2 Williams sisters had turned into vengeful ghosts, and their spirits would not leave the world until the murderer died. In early 2012, a resident living in the Skyview Park building said that when he passed by the 30th floor, he suddenly saw a black shadow glide past the nearby room. But when he looked inside, he saw no one. In June 2014, an unmarried pregnant girl wearing a hospital gown sat on the rooftop of the Skyview Park building with the intention of ending her life. Fortunately, she was discovered and stopped in time. In August 2018, a 55-year-old man climbed to the rooftop of the building and took his own life. When the police and paramedics arrived, the man had already passed away. Police later found a suicide note on the man's body. According to the preliminary investigation, the man did this because of illness and wariness with life. Some people believe that the man had been possessed by the ghosts of the 2 Williams sisters, leading him to decisively carry out that act. After many sad stories continued to occur at Skyview Park, apartment 3016 on the 30th floor became known as the #1 haunted house in New York City. But the story continued to spread until today. As for Michael, the perpetrator, he has not yet been executed. He is still serving his sentence in prison. The video ends here today, and I'll see you in the next videos. Goodbye.